So in the coloring process, the first step is to build our palette. Now, we already have our palette prepared here, so I'm going to grab my palette by simply dragging my character turnaround into my project. And I'm going to shrink this picture so it's nice and small because it's my color character off to the side that I want to look at. So, as you can see, there aren't a huge amount of colors on this character. What I'm going to do is zoom in and I'm going to select my eyedropper tool and I'm going to hit here in this brown area to select this brown, and then I'm going to click on my palette over here and you can see that it's added this brown. Do the same with the light area of skin and the dark area of skin, and then finally the pink of his gums. The other colours are the black of the outlines and the white of the eyes and teeth, and the maracas of course aren't making an appearance in this animation. So I can delete that now, and I don't need my character turnaround anymore, so I can delete that from the library. And using these colours, I'm just going to zoom in to show you first and foremost how to colour in your character. This will vary from program to program, but for all programs that use vector, brushes and art, the colouring in works a little bit different to how it does it with bitmaps. Essentially, we need a perfect area enclosed within the vector brush lines to fill in. So let's just go ahead and give it a test and see how we went with our line works. So that was obviously a complete area. I'm just going to tap and with my paint bucket selected, fill those areas in. Okay, so I haven't had any trouble there, and now I'm going to move along to the dark areas of the skin. People tend to have different preferences to how they like to colour in the skin tones. The way I like to do it is to draw an outline around the areas that are in shadow and fill them in first. So in Flash there's this tool where you can change the brush to paint behind the lines that you've already drawn, and I like to use this to draw in my shadow areas like so, simply to outline, and usually everything in the far background is completely covered in shadow, like the hand here, and then I can select my highlight and fill in the front bits. I'm pretty happy with how that turned out, and then finally I have white, which I can paint in the eyes, and then I'm done. So that's how I paint one character frame. But as you can see, there are quite a number of frames. Well over 100 animation frames here. So we're going to want to streamline this process as much as we possibly can. And the way I like to do this is to do one color at a time across all the frames, and then return to the start again, do the next color, and so on and so forth. Now this is going to be fairly straightforward because basically there are only 3 colors to do, but I'm going to separate the body and head layer and the tail layer by hiding the tail, and I'm going to go through and do the tail later. That's just simply so I can isolate them easier, paint the single layer without jumping between the 2 layers for the tail and the body, so that if I need to make any fixes, if there are any gaps in the lines or brush strokes, I don't accidentally paint on the wrong layer, and that would just, in a very minute way, slow things down. But we're all about optimization, because while in traditional animation studios it would take a number of people to fill in the many various roles to create an animation, including colorist and line artist and all of that, in this day and age we can be every one of those roles in our own home studios. We can be the colorist and the line artist all by ourselves, but this is more work. So we want to simplify this to streamline the process as much as possible, and this is one of the ways I think it works well. So I'm selecting my brown, and with my paint bucket selected, I fill them in. As you can see, I've immediately found a problem with this area, and I suspect it's here in that ear, so I'm just drawing a little dot of brown to fill that in and painting, and that has resolved the problem. So then I can continue to go through and paint the rest of the monkey body, and I'm happy with that. And then one frame after the other, I basically want to quickly flick into the next frame and move along as fast as possible. As usual, it's good to flick back and forward between the frames just to make sure there aren't places that you've missed in the colouring in, or areas that have gone over into the places that they shouldn't. The interesting thing about this process is how extremely quickly the animation starts to feel very solid. The colours are almost a finishing touch. It feels like we're wrapping it all up. The reality is there are a few little things we're going to be doing after we do the colouring, but it definitely is one of the most major aspects that really brings our animation to a bit of a close and winds it down, because we're really refining and polishing it off here. And it makes a huge difference in the course of the production once we add the colour to our frame-by-frame animation. And it is, in my opinion, the most satisfying for the least amount of work, comparatively speaking. As you can see in this area, when I paint, it's filled in the whole thing again, so there's a gap somewhere. So what I usually like to do to check where there's a gap if I don't exactly know where the gap is draw a line halfway down the area I want to fill and fill in both. And as you can see, obviously the problem is in this half, and then I do the same and I follow it along, and it seems like the gap is right here in this corner, and after filling it in with a little bit of a brush, then that has solved the problem. What I find interesting too about this process is that the painting, filling in the character, seems to almost soften the ridiculousness of our animation smears for some reason. Not entirely sure why, I suppose because we're adding some solidity to the character, and also going through the frames in context is a little more satisfying than drawing the actual animation smears themselves, because they can feel a bit ridiculous when we sit drawing them for 10 minutes and just seeing how silly they look. But when we flick through the frames and we can see them play out, it's a bit different. There's a little gap here somewhere, so there we go, fix that up. I do have to backtrack and painting the eyebrows that I've missed, because I keep forgetting the eyebrows. There's something wrong with my subconscious and the ability to remember eyebrows. Apparently that is a fatal flaw of mine. As you can see here, I've forgotten the line around the ear altogether, so the colouring process is useful to find flaws like that as well, because obviously they become glaringly apparent when you can't even fill in an area because you forgot a line. Now the colouring in this area is a bit different because we have so many layers. So first I'm going to isolate the layers and just show the head, and I'm going to colour in the hair areas of the head like this, and I'm going to do so for 3 of these key frames, ignoring that middle one again, because essentially there are only 3 frames. So I can actually come back and select this one facing the middle and paste it in all of the frames facing the middle. But I'm not going to do that now, because I'm just going to come back through later and do the rest of the colouring and then paste them only once. So I'm going to colour in 3 of these heads all the way through with all the colours, and in the end just paste them all. On the next layer is the hair. So I'm going to wireframe and lock the head. I'm then going to select the hair layer and draw a brown brush line to separate the hair from that head section, maybe even raise it slightly so that the lines are a little more flush. Then go to the next frame and do the same thing. And you'll find that when I reveal the head from its wireframe, it makes them merge together seamlessly. So going back to my hair frame and continuing on with this process, I'm going to do this until I return to a frame exactly like this. So this next one, and then one more, and then we're back to the start. Actually, I got my calculations wrong there. This hair piece doesn't appear again, it's the second one, which appears here. So there we go, I've finished colouring in the hair. Then I'm going to unwireframe the head, and I'm going to reveal the body. And the body I only have to paint once. Click, 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 and I'm done. And then moving on to the rest of the animation. Hopefully there aren't too many gaps and I can just sort of breeze through this a bit quicker. Flicking back and forward to make sure that I'm not missing anything. The eyebrows! Don't forget the eyebrows! So I've finished colouring in the brown fur of the monkey's body, and now I'm going to lock and wireframe that layer and return to my tail layer and just go in reverse, flicking through backwards through these frames and just simply filling in the tail. And when we get back to the very start of the animation, we'll see a fully furred up monkey ready to go. So now that I'm back to the start, I'm going to unwireframe and unlock my first layer, and I'm just going to play through, see how this looks. Feels pretty solid. I haven't seemed to miss anything except for those central frames, which I'll fix up later. Okay, cool. So I'm happy to continue now. The next bit, I'm not going to do all of the skin at once. I'm simply going to do the shadows of the skin. So I'm going to hide my tail once again just to remove any visual busyness. And I'm just going to flick back and forward through the frames. This one's going to take a little longer than doing the tail because I'm not just simply clicking and filling in, but instead I'm outlining areas of shadow and filling those in to later return and fill in the highlight areas. In finding the areas of shadow, it's something that you sort of get used to doing and sort of get a feel for as you learn it. But if you're sort of starting off, it might be something where you're not quite sure exactly where to fill in or what is shadow of skin. So what I like to do is pick an area for the direction of the light that is going to be consistent throughout the entirety of the animated segment. And I outline areas opposing the direction of that area of light So for example, in this situation, the area of light is sort of shining forward on the front of the monkey but slightly down. So I'm filling in general sort of the lower areas of the monkey, but that changes throughout because the monkey rotates and moves around. So we just sort of need to keep track of where his body is and what areas of the monkey's skin is facing up at the time. Now in general, a general rule, I'm filling in the eye socket areas because they're usually darker anyway, because they're deeper in the ridges of the face. Same goes with the ear. I pretty much always fill in the side and middle of the ear. Whenever I have a face with the lower eyelids sort of half covering the bottom of the eyes and I'm filling in the skin shadows and highlights, I generally like to leave a highlight on the bottom eyelid, just sort of in the middle, and that makes it pop out a bit and look a little more three-dimensional, adds some impact to expression, which is quite useful. There's another mistake here, which I've just let pass me by, is I've just filled in the arm where I don't need to fill in the arm. It's meant to be fur. So I've just fixed that one as well. Once again, there's an area of fur I've forgotten to fill in, which is the arm. So always use these opportunities when you're filling in other areas of the body to notice the areas that you've missed. It's important when you're using shadows to complement the smears that are happening. So as you can see, there's quite a long facial smear happening here. So I've filled in the eye sockets to stretch along with that. Sometimes in vector programs that sort of have this feature, if the outline of the shadow you've drawn is something you're not happy with, you can tweak it. In Flash, I do this by holding Control and dragging out the edges. But I imagine most vector animation programs will allow you to do this because the edges of the paint areas are made of vectors themselves, which are highly manipulatable as opposed to bitmap images. So that's something to keep in mind as well, that if you want to edit the shadow or manipulate the edges of the shadow once you've drawn them, that's something you can definitely do. Now we've hit this area where the layers are dividing, so I first focus on the head and focusing on that light direction once again, drawing in the shadow outlines sort of in this sort of way. The eyelids are lowered at the top, and that's something that I want to pop out a bit, like I did with the lower eyelids when they were raised. And once again, it helps to emphasize the expression that's on the character's face, which in this case is something along the lines of dazed, I suppose you could say. These shadows help bring out the character's shape in their face, and so where we draw the shadows is quite pivotal to helping show what the character's three-dimensional attributes are. So for example, in this situation, he's got quite the underbite in his jaw with his open mouth, so I've curved the shadows around and completely covering most of his lower jaw in shadow, because I feel that accentuates that underbite and helps add some dimension to that area. Here in the head, where we have this smear happening, I'm going to hide the hair just so I'm isolating the head layer, and I'm going to draw a fairly centralized shadow area. This bit is slightly confusing because the eyes look a bit odd, but I'm going to draw the shadow of the eyes all the way across the face. Oops, not the top of the face as well. Where is that coming from? There's a gap here. There we go. Okay. So when I fill that in, you'll see that there is pretty much a shadow all the way across the length of where the eyes are, which I think will help emphasize the smear. So I'm going to do the same along the bottom of the face, and then I'll pop in some shadow for the ears. Now for our first expression, we essentially have this face pose twice in reverse. I know I said I have 3 poses, but in reality there are 2 because one of them is a duplicate. So I could, in theory, which I might do, just color in one of them and then flip it and reverse it for the other, because the lighting position of the shadows and highlights of the face are the same on both. So I'm just going to make sure I fill in the bottom of the head the same, and that works well. And I'm not going to color in this one. I'm just going to leave it and color in the first 2 and come back to it later. Now I'm going to reveal the body and color in the skin area and all that stuff that I haven't done yet, like so. You'll notice when I say that I use the shadow as an opportunity to make things pop out three-dimensionally, that the torso is one of those areas that it's most helpful, because I get to, with my shadow, divide from the upper torso and the lower torso using my shadow lines. You want to be consistent from frame to frame, so sometimes it's good to flick back and forward to make sure it is being consistent. For example, the lines here need to make sure that they're moving in the right direction. The other thing to keep in mind too is that as areas of the monkey, or the areas that you're shading, are coming out from behind, for example here the hand is emerging from behind the monkey, even though these fingers are sort of protruding forward in the hand pose, I cover the whole hand area in shadow until they eventually sort of emerge to be a little more towards the front of the monkey, and that helps to kind of create the illusion of depth, which is quite useful. This is another one of those mindless animation activities. The funny thing is, in terms of what takes the most time when it comes to frame-by-frame animation and what takes the most concentration, the first part, the animatic and the motion planning, take the most attention and least time. Whereas the solid drawing and the in-betweens and the colouring take the least concentration and effort and the most time. So as such, I tend to personally sort of fluctuate between concentrating quite strongly when I'm doing my motion planning and animatic and my keyframes and breakdowns, and then just zoning out and listening to music and podcasts and relaxing when I get up to the line work and doing the colouring. So we're very close to the end here. There's only a couple of frames left. I really like this last stretch in the character before he lands. It's quite satisfying to me, which is fun. It's always nice to sort of look at your animations, when you return to them the next day, or when you've sort of made a halfway progress, and sort of step back and watch what you've done and feel satisfied with it. One of the best lessons I've learnt through the process of learning all this stuff is to really be easy on yourself, because you're on a journey and you're not going to be a master of it in a day. In fact, it's going to take years and years of work. So the first lesson you learn may as well be learning to appreciate and enjoy the process, learning to step back, look at what you've done, and see things that you can value or be proud of, because then that very long journey of mastering a craft, such as animation, becomes a lot more bearable and a lot more enjoyable. And you'll find, I personally believe, that you'll improve a lot faster too, and you'll find a lot more motivation to practice and create. And your creativity and the projects that you want to work on and the ideas that you get will flow easier when you have a bit of leniency on yourself and your progression, and the fact that it's a learning process and takes sometimes quite a lot of time. So if you're only up to animating stick figures, then that's great. Just make sure that you're enjoying animating those stick figures and stepping back, watching the stick fights or love scenes or whatever you're doing with stick figures, and appreciating it, and then challenging yourself and come up with new and interesting and ambitious ideas for what your next stick figure project will be. That's actually how most animators that I know started out. They didn't start off with full body animation like this. This is something that you sort of graduate to as you learn some of the basics of the animation programs that you use and animation techniques for motion and creating interesting movement. Once you have a basic grasp of those things and you develop your drawing skills to the point where you're ready, it's sort of a natural progression. But like I said, many, if not most of the animating artists I know that work in the industry today began creating stick figure animations and really simplistic cartoons. So now I'm ready for the highlights, and it's as simple as filling in the blanks. So quite like we did with the brown of the monkey tail, we're just flicking back and filling in the areas that we haven't yet filled in next to the shadow. And this again is one of those things that can be quite satisfying. It does take a little bit of concentration to make sure you hit in the right areas. As you go through, always make sure to flick back and forward because you don't want to miss any areas, because this is essentially my last time going through frame by frame and filling in these details. So just make sure you're not missing anything as you go along. Like eyebrows, for example. Once again, we've arrived at my animation's halfway point where the head and the body and the hair are separated for the shaking of the head animation. So I'm going to bring up this head, fill in the gaps like so. And now that I've done those 2 frames, that's basically all I need to do, because I'm going to copy this frame facing the other direction, and I'm going to create a duplicate keyframe next to the frame facing the left and paste my frame and flip it horizontal. And with the onion skin on, I'm just going to match its position exactly like so, and then I can replace the head facing that direction, and then go through the entirety of this head shake and replace all the areas that I haven't yet colored in with the heads facing in that direction that I have colored in. So there you go, that's my head shake in progress. Shake, shake, shake. Shake, shake, shake. And all of a sudden, that whole section is done. Now moving on to the rest of my animation. This next section has a division, so the head is on its own layer, so I'll paint in the head and then move down to the torso and limbs layer. I actually didn't fill in any shadow here, but I feel like I should, so I'm just going to add a little bit to the belly, but then just paint in the rest with the highlights, and then go through to when it's all back on one layer once again. It can be such a useful tool to divide the head and body or other areas of your characters onto separate layers depending on when you need more control in the manipulation. In areas with the most motion, with smears and with all that intense squashing, stretching stuff, I tend to like to do it all on one layer because you're essentially just working with one flat image, creating the manipulation and the distortion. But with simple, smaller movements like a head shake or like a wobbling or swaying, I tend to find it's easier to subdivide the areas of anatomy or sections of the character and sort of tweak them separately from each other to create a smoother outcome. Now there is a section I have forgotten entirely, and that is the gums. So I'm going to go in here with the color that I put in my palette for the gums and just make sure that they are in there. And then I'm going to return back to doing the highlights of the skin. we're getting very close to the beginning of the animation, which I can feel the calm before the storm. I can feel the excitement building and boiling in my blood. Not really. I've been animating for hours and hours and hours, and I'm going slightly insane. And that's another thing that you can expect to happen in the process of creating frame-by-frame, keyframe-based animation, is that you'll slowly lose your sanity, which is okay because that's a decision you made when you decided to become an animator. You decided to let go of reality, to lose your control and grip on sanity itself. Welcome to the world of animation. Yeah, sorry. The interesting thing too is as I'm finishing off colouring in the rest of this monkey, which I'm nearly finished with, he looks more like a monkey. I felt like before I'd done the fur and the skin, he sort of just looked like a person. A slightly naked person with a tail. Speaking of slightly naked person with a tail, kapow! We have a monkey. Let's play this animation. Bang, bang, bang. Ooh. Okay, I feel like I might have missed something in here. Yes, I did. I spotted this little section. I forgot to fill in the eyelid. And play that through. Alright, cool. I think that's about it. Now I could go through and fill in all the whites of the eyes and the teeth, but because I don't have a background, it doesn't really matter because the background is white, so I'm actually just going to leave it. But as I play through this, you can see that the animation feels quite refined now that it's all coloured in. Everything feels pretty solid, and we're really getting to the place where we can start to call this animation finished. But we're not there yet. There's one last thing I want to do, and that's called motion tweaks. We're going to just adjust and manipulate and polish our little animation until we're completely satisfied with it. Thank you for watching and enduring through this colouring tutorial, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.